"She's carrying us," my sister announced at Thanksgiving, swirling her wine like she'd said something clever. "That's literally her only purpose in this family." My mother laughed. My father raised his glass. Nobody looked at me. "My name is Nora Callahan. I'm 31 years old, a senior software engineer at a firm in Austin, and for the past 6 years, I've been my family's most reliable financial appliance. Not their daughter, not their sister, their appliance. Something you plug in, draw power from, and never think about until the lights go out." That Thanksgiving was the last one I spent pretending not to hear them. My sister Diane is 3 years younger than me and has never once held a job for longer than 4 months. She calls herself a creative entrepreneur, which, in practice, means she launches businesses that my parents fund and I quietly bail out when they collapse. There was the candle company, the online boutique, the wellness coaching phase, and most recently, a food truck that hemorrhaged money so fast it made my head spin. Each time, my parents would call me with voices full of manufactured urgency. "We just need a little help. You know how hard she works. You wouldn't want her to lose everything." I never wanted her to lose everything. I just wanted someone to acknowledge that I was the one making sure she didn't. My parents had their own list of needs. My father's truck, my mother's medical bills before her insurance kicked in, the roof repair they couldn't afford the same year they took a cruise to Alaska. I paid for things without being asked directly because they had perfected the art of implying without asking. A sigh here, a worried look there. "We just don't know what we're going to do." And I would reach for my phone and transfer money before the sentence was finished. I thought that was love. I had confused love with being needed. So, when Diane said what she said at that table, surrounded by food I had contributed to, in a house where I had quietly paid the property tax 3 months earlier because my parents were short, I set down my fork. I looked at the centerpiece. I breathed. And then I remembered the appointment I had scheduled for the following Monday. I didn't say a word. I folded my napkin, thanked my mother for the meal, put on my coat, and walked to my car. Behind me, Diane called out something about being dramatic. My father told her to let me go. My mother said I'd call by morning. I didn't call by morning. That Monday appointment was with my attorney. I'd made it 6 weeks earlier, after a smaller moment that nobody else probably even remembered. My father had forwarded me a bill not even asked, just forwarded it with a single line. "Can you handle this?" $1,400 for a water heater. I was sitting at my desk at work when I got it, and I remember staring at the email for a long time. Not because of the money, because of the "can you?" Not "would you be willing to?" Not "we're struggling, and we could really use help." Just "can you?" The way you ask someone to pass the salt. I handled it. But I also made an appointment. In the weeks between that appointment and Thanksgiving, I had been quietly doing what needed to be done. My attorney helped me understand which financial entanglements were truly obligations and which ones I had simply allowed to become habits. The answer was uncomfortable. I had co-signed a small business loan for Diane's food truck. My name was on a credit card my parents used as overflow when their own was maxed. I had set up automatic transfers monthly without being asked anymore because somewhere along the way asking had become unnecessary. I had built myself into infrastructure, and infrastructure doesn't get thanked. It just gets expected. My attorney was methodical and kind. She walked me through every document without judgment. She told me what I could exit cleanly, what required more steps, and what I needed to do carefully to protect myself from consequences that were never supposed to be mine in the first place. I took notes. I went home. I made a plan. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I put it in motion. The week after Diane's toast, my phone was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like my family was giving me time to apologize. I used that quiet to make calls. My bank first, then a credit counselor, then a conversation with Diane's lender about the nature of my co-signature and what options existed. Each call felt like carefully untying a knot that had been pulled tight for years. I didn't feel angry. I felt like someone returning a library book that had been sitting on my shelf so long, I'd forgotten it wasn't mine. The calls started on a Thursday. Diane called first, which surprised me, because Diane rarely called unless she wanted something specific. "Hey, so, kind of a weird question, but did something happen with the truck account?" Her voice was doing that thing where it pretended to be casual and was clearly not. I told her I'd sent a letter to her lender, clarifying my role. She went quiet. What does that mean? It means I'm no longer guaranteeing the loan, I said. I gave them 60 days notice. You have time to refinance or find a cosigner. She said that wasn't possible. I said I understood and that I was sorry for the inconvenience and that I hoped she found a good solution. She hung up. My mother called 20 minutes later. Her voice was the one she used when she was trying to seem calm but was absolutely not calm, a particular flatness, like she was reading from a script she hadn't rehearsed. Nora, your sister is very upset. I told her I understood that. This is going to affect her business. I said I understood that too. I don't think you do. There was a long pause. We raised you to take care of this family. And that sentence, right there, was the one that had been embedded in me since I was probably 12 years old. We raised you to take care of this family, not to take care of yourself, not to build your own life and contribute what you freely chose to contribute, to take care of them. As a function, as a role I had been assigned before I was old enough to understand what I was agreeing to. I told my mother I loved her. I told her I would always love her. And then I told her that loving someone didn't mean being their financial safety net indefinitely, without acknowledgement or reciprocity. She told me I had been reading too many self-help books. I told her I had to go. The overflow credit card was next. I called the bank and had my name removed from the account. They required me to pay off my portion of the balance first, which I did, and then I was simply gone from it. Removed. Like correcting a clerical error. My parents discovered this on a Saturday when my mother tried to use the card at a grocery store and it was declined. She called me from the parking lot, not crying, but close to it, her voice tight and unfamiliar. The card isn't working. I know, I said. I had my name taken off. There was a silence that had weather in it, the kind of pause that precedes something. Why would you do that? Because it was my credit, I said, and I needed it back. My father got on the phone. He didn't bother with preamble. Fix it. Just those 2 words. Fix it. Like I was tech support, like I was a problem they were logging a ticket for. I told him I couldn't fix it because it wasn't broken. I thanked him for calling and told him I loved him. He told me I was being cruel. I thought about that word for a long time after I hung up. Cruel. I had wired money at midnight. I had skipped vacations. I had deflected questions from friends about why I never seemed to have savings despite my salary. I had smiled at holidays and held my tongue and paid for things that were never once called what they were: subsidies. Ongoing, unacknowledged, completely expected subsidies. I had done all of that, and stepping back from it was cruel. I poured myself a glass of water and went to bed. The intervention, when it came, arrived dressed as a birthday party. My cousin Rachel turned 30 in December, and my aunt hosted a gathering at her house in San Marcos, the kind of cheerful family event that normally I would have attended with a hostess gift and a smile, the kind where I would circulate and make conversation and leave early enough to be up for work. I was invited through a group text, and I went. Not to make peace. Not because I'd changed my mind. I went because I genuinely loved Rachel and because I had decided, early on, that I would not become someone who disappeared from every room my family occupied. That wasn't the life I wanted. What I didn't anticipate was that the party had been arranged, at least partially, as a stage. I arrived to find my parents already there, sitting with Diane and my aunt at the kitchen table, in the way that people sit when they've been waiting. The energy in the room shifted when I walked in. Rachel hugged me first, and she held on a beat longer than usual, and I understood then that she had either known or suspected. My father stood when I came into the kitchen. He didn't waste time. In front of my aunt, my cousin, her friends, a neighbor I vaguely recognized, he announced, with the steady gravity of someone delivering a verdict, that I had abandoned the family, that I had removed myself from shared responsibilities without warning or reason, and that it was putting significant strain on people who depended on me. The room got the way rooms get when something uncomfortable happens at a gathering. Quiet, but pretending not to be, people studying their drinks. Diane added, from her chair, that she might lose the truck. That she had called 3 banks and couldn't find anyone to refinance in time. That I had done that to her. I stood there, and I felt the shape of the thing clearly. They were rewriting the story in real time, and in this version, I was the one who had caused harm. Not the years of transfers. Not the co-signatures I'd been pressured into. Not the card that had been used casually for 6 years as an extension of their own budget. Just this. Just my withdrawal. That was the cruelty. That was the damage. I put my purse on the counter. I opened my phone. I pulled up my banking app, which I had screenshotted and organized into a folder 3 weeks earlier in anticipation of something like this, and I set the phone flat on the table and turned it to face them. If we're talking about what's happened in this family, I said, and my voice came out even, let's use the actual numbers. I walked them through it. Not loudly. Not with tears. Methodically, the way I would walk a client through a project timeline. The transfers. The dates. The amounts. The loan I co-signed when I was 26 and had never been asked if I was comfortable with, only told that it would really mean a lot. The 4 months I had covered my parents' mortgage when my father was between jobs, which had been framed at the time as just until things stabilize, and which had never once been mentioned again or repaid. I kept my voice low and my hands still. By the 3rd year of records, Diane had stopped looking at the table. My father's face had gone to a place I didn't have a word for. My aunt excused herself. Rachel stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall. Not leaving, not entering. I picked up my phone when I was done. I love this family, I said. I have always loved this family. And I spent 6 years showing that love the only way any of you ever seemed to want it. I put my phone in my purse. I won't be doing that anymore. I hugged Rachel on my way out and told her I'd call her the next day to wish her happy birthday properly, just the 2 of us. She squeezed my hand and didn't say anything, which was the kindest response available. Outside, the December air was cold and clean, and I sat in my car for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. No crying. No relief, not yet. Just the very particular sensation of having said something true out loud in a room full of people who had spent years depending on my silence. That was the last time I attended a family event for a while. The weeks that followed were strange in the way that stillness is strange when you're used to noise. My phone, which had been an instrument of obligation for so long, always one call away from a need, always one notification away from a transfer, became just a phone. I used it to make dinner plans with friends I had been neglecting. To video call my college roommate, who lived in Portland now and had 2 kids I barely knew. To look up flights for a trip to Portugal I had been putting off for 3 years because there was always something more pressing. I booked the trip. Diane called twice in January. The first call was angry, her voice clipped and tight, telling me that the truck had been repossessed and that I had effectively ended her business. I listened to her say it. I told her I was sorry she was going through that, and I meant it, and I told her that I hoped she found a path forward that was built on firmer ground. She called me a word I won't repeat and hung up. The second call, 2 weeks later, was different. She called on a Wednesday evening, and when I answered, she didn't start with a demand. She started with silence, and then, "Can I ask you something?" I said yes. "How did you do it?" I didn't understand at first. "How did you just stop?" Like, how did you decide that it was okay to just stop? I sat with that question for a moment before I answered. I told her I hadn't decided it was okay. I told her I had decided it was necessary, and that those were different things. I told her that for a long time I had confused obligation with love, and that untangling the two had been the hardest and most important thing I'd ever done. She didn't say much after that. But she didn't hang up angry, and she didn't ask me for anything. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. My father asked to meet me in February. He chose a diner near my parents' house, one we used to go to when I was a kid for Saturday breakfast, and I appreciated the choice even as I recognized that it might have been strategic. Neutral territory. Familiar ground. I got there first and ordered coffee and waited. He looked older. Not dramatically, just the way a season adds itself to a person without any single visible moment you can point to. He sat down across from me and wrapped his hands around his mug and looked at the table for a long moment before he looked at me. "I want to say something," he said, "and I want to say it right. So I'm going to be slow about it." I told him to take his time. "I didn't know," he said, "how much of it there was. I knew we asked you for help. I think I didn't let myself see all of it at once, because if I saw all of it at once, I'd have had to feel something about it that I didn't want to feel. I waited. I think I told myself that you were doing fine, that you could afford it, that it wasn't hurting you. He looked up, and I think that was easier to believe than the alternative. I asked him what the alternative was. He looked like a man choosing between two doors he didn't want to open. That we were taking advantage of you, he said quietly, and that it wasn't okay. There was a long silence. Outside, a truck went by. A waitress refilled the coffee of the man 2 booths over. I'm not asking you to come back, he said, to what it was before. I don't think that would be right. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. What it cost you. I looked at my father, this man who had forwarded me bills without asking, who had told me to fix it from a grocery store parking lot, who had stood up at a birthday party and called my leaving a form of abandonment, and I understood something about him that I hadn't fully allowed myself to understand before. He was not a villain. He was a person who had made a choice, gradually and then completely, to not look too closely at where the comfort was coming from. That choice had been wrong. It had cost me real things. And his recognizing it now didn't undo any of that. But it was something. Thank you for saying that, I told him. I paid for my own coffee, and I left him there, and I did not feel like I had won anything. I felt like I had finally gotten somewhere true. Portugal in March was everything I had let myself imagine and then stopped imagining, because imagining things you keep not having is its own kind of hurt. I went alone, which I had been slightly nervous about, and then immediately stopped being nervous about the moment I arrived in Lisbon and stood on a hillside with a pastry and looked at the city descending to the water. I walked for miles every day. I ate at small restaurants where I ordered without worrying about what anything cost. I bought books in English from a shop near the river and read them on cafe terraces with espresso going cold beside me. I called Rachel one afternoon from a park bench and told her where I was, and she laughed, not a polite laugh but a real one, surprised and delighted. You actually went, she said. I told her I had actually gone. She told me she was proud of me, and I felt that land in a way I wasn't prepared for, and I had to take a moment before I could answer. It's an odd thing to grieve and be happy at the same time. But Portugal let me do both. I came back in early April and walked into my apartment and stood in the kitchen for a long time, just being there. The same counters, the same light, the same view of the parking lot and the oak tree past it. Everything identical to when I left. But I was different in some way I hadn't finished understanding, yet lighter by something I couldn't name, carrying less of a weight that had become so familiar I'd stopped being able to feel its shape. I was in the coffee shop near my office when I ran into Diane. She was sitting alone with a laptop, earbuds in, frowning at her screen with the concentrated look of someone actually working. I almost walked past. Then she looked up. We looked at each other for a moment. She pulled out one earbud. Hey, I said. She gestured at the chair across from her with a small, slightly uncertain motion that might have been an invitation. I sat down. She had a new project, she told me. Not a business, not yet, maybe eventually, but right now just a freelance gig doing social media management for a few small local businesses. She had started it on her own. She was making less than she'd ever made, which wasn't hard because she had never managed to make much, but it was hers, entirely and unambiguously. She talked about it without asking for anything, without setting up a need, just telling me about her day the way people tell each other about their days. I told her about Portugal. Her eyes did something when I talked about it, not envy exactly, more like a recalibration. Like she was revising something she had assumed about me. I always thought you were just okay with everything, she said. Like, I think I assumed you liked being the one who handled things. That it suited you. I told her that was a very convenient thing to have assumed. She looked down at her coffee. Yeah, she said. I know. We sat there for another half hour, which was longer than Diane and I had voluntarily spent together in years without it being a holiday or a transaction. She made me laugh once genuinely, unexpectedly, with an impression of our mother attempting to use a new app on her phone. I forgot, sometimes, that Diane she had been so long just a drain on my resources that I had lost track of her as a person. I didn't leave with a plan. I didn't leave having decided anything about what our relationship would look like going forward. I just left. We said goodbye outside on the sidewalk, and she gave me a small, awkward hug that felt like the first honest thing we'd done in a long time. I walked to my car and sat there for a moment in the April sun. I thought about the version of me that had sat at that Thanksgiving table 6 months earlier, listening to my sister explain my purpose in the family, folding my napkin, and not saying a word. That person had been exhausted in a way I hadn't even fully understood at the time because I had been living inside it. The exhaustion of existing primarily in relation to other people's needs. Of having replaced my own preferences so many times, in so many small ways, that I had nearly lost the habit of knowing what they were. I thought about what it had cost me. The real number, not just in dollars. The years of feeling vaguely guilty for having a savings account. The relationship I had let drift because I was always too drained on weekends to invest in it. The work project I had declined because it required travel and I couldn't justify being unreachable for a week. All of the small self-erasures that had accumulated so quietly. And I thought about what I had now, which was not a great dramatic victory and not a perfect family and not a life without complication or loneliness. What I had was a bank account that reflected only my choices. An apartment where no one had a key except me. A calendar that had Portugal on it and nothing on it because anyone else needed me to be available. What I had was the specific, unglamorous, profound freedom of belonging first to myself. I was not the family's emergency fund. I was not their cushion or their guarantee or their plan B. I was a complete and solvent and increasingly well-rested person who chose what she gave and to whom and when. And that choice, exercised for the first time in earnest, had changed the weight of every room I walked into. I started the car. There was a dinner to go to friends from work, a place in East Austin with good tacos and an outdoor patio. Nothing significant, just a Tuesday evening with people I liked, no agenda, no need being managed, no transfer to approve on the way home. I had been looking forward to it for 3 days. That, I had learned, was what it felt like to have something that was only mine. I pulled out of the parking lot into the afternoon, and for once finally, steadily, completely the road ahead of me belonged only to wherever I decided to go.